they said humanity would bow. They said we would tremble before their 1,000-year empire, their fleets that stretched across star systems, their technology that could reshape worlds with a thought. The Galactic Assembly had conquered species far older and, wiser than us, brought entire civilizations to their knees with nothing more than a demonstration of power. But, they made one critical mistake. They assumed we were like everyone else. When the first human ship arrived at the Assembly's capital world, it didn't request permission to dock. It didn't follow their sacred protocols or acknowledge their ancient authority. Instead, Captain Sarah Chin of the UES Defiance did something that hadn't been done in the Assembly's millennium-long reign. She laughed at them. What followed would shatter the foundation of galactic civilization, prove that sometimes the newest voice in the room is the one that changes everything, and show the universe exactly why humanity had survived every extinction event their own planet could throw at them. This is the story of how Earth's ships faced the Galactic Assembly and mocked their authority until the very foundations of their empire cracked. The bridge of the UES Defiance hummed with quiet efficiency as Captain Sarah Chen reviewed the tactical display for the 100th time. 3 months of faster-than-light travel had brought them to the edge of what the galaxy called civilized space, where the Galactic Assembly held court over 700 member species across 43 star systems. "Captain, we're receiving a transmission," reported Lieutenant Commander Marcus Webb, his fingers dancing across the communications console. "It's coming from the orbital station around Valdris Prime." Sarah straightened in her command chair, brushing a strand of dark hair from her face. At 37, she had already earned a reputation as one of Earth's most unconventional starship captains, which was precisely why the Terran Council had chosen her for this mission. First contact with a galactic civilization required someone who wouldn't be easily intimidated. "Put it through, Marcus." The main viewscreen flickered to life, revealing a being that defied easy description. The creature possessed 6 eyes arranged in 2 rows across what might have been a head, while translucent tentacles writhed where humans might expect to see hair. Its skin appeared to shimmer between blue and green, and, when it spoke, the universal translator rendered its words in clipped, authoritative tones. "Unknown vessel, you have entered assembly space without proper credentials or authorization. State your designation and purpose, then prepare to be boarded for inspection and processing." Sarah glanced at her first officer, Commander Lisa Park, who had served with her for 5 years across 3 different ships. Lisa's expression remained carefully neutral, but Sarah caught the slight tightening around her eyes that indicated suppressed amusement. "This is Captain Sarah Chen of the United Earthship Defiance, representing humanity and the Terran Republic. We come seeking diplomatic contact with the Galactic Assembly." The alien's tentacles stilled for a moment, then resumed their restless motion. "Humanity is not registered in our database. You will maintain current position while we determine your legal status. Any movement toward Valdris Prime without authorization will be considered an act of aggression." Sarah felt her jaw clench. 3 months of travel, carefully planned diplomatic overtures, and they were being treated like smugglers at a checkpoint. She had read every available report about the Assembly's protocols, studied their interaction patterns with newly contacted species, and understood exactly what game they were playing. "Commander Park, scan that station. I want to know what we're dealing with." Lisa's hands moved smoothly across her console. 300 meters in diameter, roughly spherical construction. "I'm detecting advanced shielding, multiple weapon emplacements, and..." She paused, frowning at her display. "Captain, I'm reading at least 40 different ship configurations in the immediate vicinity. Some of them are massive." "How massive?" "The largest one is showing as 12 kilometers long." Sarah whistled low. The Defiance, at 600 meters, suddenly felt very small. But size had never been everything in a fight, and she suspected that the Assembly's first contact protocols were designed more for intimidation than actual security. "Marcus, open a channel to that station." "Channel open, Captain." Sarah stood and walked closer to the view screen, her hands clasped behind her back. "Station Commander, this is Captain Chen. We appreciate your concern for security, but we're here on a peaceful mission. We'll be proceeding to Valdris Prime to present our credentials to the appropriate authorities." The alien's 6 eyes seemed to focus on her with greater intensity. "You will not proceed anywhere without proper authorization. Lower your shields and prepare for boarding, or you will be forcibly stopped." Now that's interesting, Sarah murmured, just loud enough for her bridge crew to hear. They're trying to board us before we've even been properly introduced. Marcus, are you recording this entire exchange? Yes, Captain. Full recording for the Terran Council. Sarah smiled, and several of her officers recognized the expression. It usually preceded what their tactical instructor back at the academy had termed creative interpretation of regulations. Station Commander, I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. You see, humanity has this peculiar custom where we don't allow strangers onto our ships without invitation. It's considered terribly rude. Her tone remained perfectly polite, almost conversational. Now, if you'd like to arrange a proper meeting with representatives of the Assembly, we'd be delighted to discuss diplomatic relations. The alien's tentacles began moving faster, shifting from translucent to a deeper blue color. Your customs are irrelevant. Assembly Regulation 847 requires all unknown vessels to submit to inspection before approaching any core world. Compliance is not optional. Sarah turned to her science officer. Dr. Yuki, what do our sensors tell us about their weapons? Dr. Elena Yuki, a brilliant astrophysicist who had joined the mission specifically to study alien technology, consulted her displays. Energy-based weapons, Captain. Plasma cannons, particle beams, some kind of gravitational disruptor. Powerful, but the targeting systems appear to rely heavily on automated tracking. And their shields? Standard deflector configuration, drawing power from what looks like a fusion core. Effective against most conventional weapons. Sarah nodded, her smile widening. Marcus, please inform the station commander that we'll be happy to discuss their regulations after we've spoken with someone who has actual authority to negotiate on behalf of the Assembly. The alien's skin color had shifted to an angry purple by now. I have full authority to enforce Assembly law in this sector. You will comply immediately or face the consequences. Oh, I'm sure you do, Sarah replied, her voice dripping with false sympathy. But, you see, we humans have another peculiar custom. We don't negotiate with middle management. The silence that followed stretched for nearly 30 seconds. Sarah could practically hear her crew trying not to laugh. Finally, the alien spoke again, its voice tight with barely controlled fury. Unknown vessel, you have been warned. Prepare to be fired upon. Sarah walked back to her command chair and settled into it with deliberate calm. Red alert. All hands to battle stations. Lisa, take us to 1/4 impulse, heading directly for Valdris Prime. Captain, Dr. Yuki called out, I'm detecting massive power buildups across the entire orbital defense network. At least 20 ships are moving to intercept. Good, Sarah replied. Marcus, open a ship-wide channel. Channel open. All hands, this is the captain. We are about to engage in what I like to call aggressive diplomacy. Remember that we represent not just Earth, but the entire human species. Let's show these aliens what that means. The first energy blasts from the orbital station street past the Defiance, deliberately missing by several hundred meters. Warning shots, meant to demonstrate overwhelming firepower and convince them to surrender. Lisa, evasive maneuvers. Let's see how good their tracking systems really are. The Defiance suddenly accelerated, rolling and diving in a pattern that would have been impossible for most ships of her size. Human engineering had always prioritized maneuverability over raw power, and the ship responded to Lisa's commands like a fighter rather than a cruiser. More energy beams lanced through space, but the Defiance was no longer where the targeting computers expected her to be. Sarah watched the tactical display as confusion began to spread through the assembly fleet. Their ships moved in predictable formations, following established patterns that had worked against every other species they had encountered. But humans had learned warfare in the cauldron of their own planet, where survival meant adaptation and innovation. Every conflict in human history had taught them that the side that could think fastest usually won, regardless of numbers or technology. Captain, Dr. Yuki reported, excitement creeping into her voice, their weapons are incredibly powerful, but they're not learning from our evasion patterns. They keep targeting where we were, not where we're going. That's because they've never fought anyone like us before, Sarah replied. Marcus, open a channel to the lead ship in that intercept formation.
Channel open. Attention assembly vessels, this is Captain Chen.
You've just demonstrated that you're willing to fire on diplomatic vessels conducting peaceful missions.
That's going to look very bad in our report to the Terran Council.
A new voice came over the communications system, deeper and more authoritative than the station commander.
Human vessel, I am Fleet Admiral Zektar of the Assembly Defense Force.
You will cease this aggressive behavior and submit to inspection immediately.
Sarah laughed, a genuine sound of amusement that echoed across the bridge.
Fleet Admiral, I hate to break this to you, but we're not the ones being aggressive here. You opened fire first. In human law, that's called attempted murder. Your vessel refused lawful orders and entered restricted space. Your vessel fired on a diplomatic mission. Tell me, Admiral, how do you think the other member species of your assembly will react when they learn that you shoot first and ask questions later?
How many of them joined the assembly voluntarily, and how many were coerced by displays just like this one?
The silence stretched longer this time.
Sarah could sense uncertainty beginning to creep into the assembly forces. Their doctrine had always relied on overwhelming displays of power to cow newly contacted species into submission.
No one had ever questioned the moral authority of their actions.
Dr. Yuki, Sarah said quietly, what do you make of their technology?
It's powerful, Captain, but it's also old.
Very old.
I'd estimate most of these designs are several centuries behind what they could be accomplishing with their apparent resource base.
It's as if they stopped innovating. Sarah nodded thoughtfully.
Lisa, take us through the middle of their formation. Nice and slow, so they have time to think about what they're seeing.
The Defiance altered course, heading directly toward the assembled fleet.
Sarah could see the confusion on the tactical display as ships tried to decide whether to fire on a vessel that wasn't behaving like any enemy they had encountered before. Marcus, ship-wide channel again.
Ready, Captain. All hands, we are now going to demonstrate the difference between human engineering and bureaucratic stagnation. Department heads, I want a full display. Show them what Earth can do.
Across the ship, systems that had been operating at normal efficiency suddenly came online at full capacity.
The Defiance's sensor array, designed to map unknown star systems, began actively scanning every ship in the assembly fleet.
Her deflector array, normally used for navigation, started broadcasting a complex interference pattern that played havoc with their targeting computers.
Most impressively, her fusion drive began operating in a configuration that no assembly engineer had ever seen before.
Instead of simple forward thrust, the drive created a carefully controlled plasma field that made the ship appear to flicker and dance across multiple sensor readings simultaneously. "This is impossible," came Admiral Zektar's voice, barely audible over the static that human jamming systems were creating on their communications channels. "No ship that size should be capable of such maneuvering." Sarah stood again, her voice carrying clearly over the chaos.
"Admiral, you're absolutely right. No ship that size should be able to do what we're doing.
But, then, again, no species should be able to survive multiple ice ages, asteroid impacts, and global wars on their home planet either.
Yet here we are."
The Defiance passed through the center of the assembly formation without a single ship firing on her. Sarah could see weapon systems tracking them, but confusion and uncertainty had paralyzed the fleet's response. "You see," Sarah continued, her voice now broadcasting on every frequency the assembly was using, "you've been thinking about this all wrong.
You assume that because we're new to galactic civilization, we must be primitive.
But primitive species don't build starships, Admiral. And they certainly don't build starships that can make your entire fleet look foolish." As the Defiance cleared the formation and continued toward Valdris Prime, Sarah could see several assembly ships beginning to follow, but at a respectful distance. The threatening formations had dissolved into what looked more like an escort. "Captain," Dr. Yuki called out, "I'm detecting massive communication traffic between the assembly ships and what appears to be the planetary government.
Someone very important is asking a lot of questions." Sarah smiled, settling back into her command chair. "Good. Let them ask questions.
The more they question, the more they'll realize that their standard intimidation tactics don't work on us."
"What's our next move?" Commander Park asked quietly. we're going to do exactly what we came here to do, Lisa. We're going to establish diplomatic relations with the Galactic Assembly.
But, we're going to do it as equals, not as another conquered species begging for permission to exist. The view screen showed Valdris Prime growing larger ahead of them, a blue-green world surrounded by orbital cities and defense platforms. It was the heart of the Assembly's power, the place where 700 species came to pay tribute and receive orders.
Sarah Chen, however, wasn't coming to pay tribute.
She was coming to serve notice that humanity had arrived in galactic civilization, and that they would not be following anyone else's rules but their own. The orbital docking facility around Valdris Prime was a marvel of engineering that stretched for over 50 kilometers in every direction. Sarah Chen stood in the observation deck of the Defiance, watching as thousands of ships from across the galaxy moved through carefully orchestrated traffic patterns. Each vessel was distinctly alien, representing the incredible diversity of life that the Assembly claimed to protect and govern. "It's beautiful," murmured Dr. Yuki, standing beside her captain as they watched a crystalline ship that seemed to be made entirely of living coral drift past their viewport.
"I count at least 40 different propulsion systems just in this sector alone." Sarah nodded, but her attention was focused on something else entirely. "Notice anything interesting about their docking procedures, Doctor?"
Elena Yuki consulted her tablet, reviewing the sensor data they had collected during their approach. The smaller ships are assigned to the outer rings, while larger vessels get priority docking closer to the station core.
"It's organized by, oh, I see what you mean. Exactly. It's not organized by arrival time, diplomatic importance, or even basic courtesy.
It's organized by ship size and firepower. The bigger your guns, the closer you get to Park."
Commander Park joined them at the viewport, having just finished coordinating with station traffic control. "They've assigned us to docking base 77 Alpha, about 15 kilometers out from the central hub.
Apparently, that's reserved for newly contacted species pending classification."
Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Classification?" I asked the same question.
"The dockmaster informed me that all species are evaluated for their proper place in the Assembly hierarchy based on technological advancement, military capability, and cultural development. Once we're classified, we'll be assigned permanent docking privileges appropriate to our status."
"How thoughtful of them," Sarah replied dryly. "And I suppose this classification process involves extensive testing and evaluation by Assembly experts?" 3 weeks minimum, according to the dockmaster.
"During which time we're restricted to our current docking assignment and limited to basic station services."
Sarah turned away from the viewport, her expression thoughtful.
3 weeks of being poked and prodded while Assembly bureaucrats decided where humanity fit in their carefully ordered hierarchy. 3 weeks of being treated like specimens in a laboratory while Earth waited for word about their first contact with galactic civilization. She walked back to the bridge, settling into her command chair as the Defiance maneuvered toward their assigned docking bay.
"Marcus, has the Assembly sent over their delegation yet?" "Aye, Captain. 5 representatives are standing by to come aboard for what they call preliminary assessment procedures. They're waiting for our permission to board." Sarah smiled.
At least they were asking permission this time, even if it was probably just a formality. "Dr. Yuki, I want you to prepare a full briefing on human technology and culture.
But keep it interesting.
Don't give them everything, but make sure they understand that we're not some primitive species that just discovered fire."
"Understood, Captain."
"Lisa, I want a full security team present for this meeting, but keep them casual.
These aliens need to understand that we're being polite, not because we're afraid, but because we choose to be."
An hour later, Sarah found herself in the Defiance's main conference room, facing 5 of the most unusual beings she had ever encountered.
The Assembly delegation was clearly chosen to represent their diversity.
One appeared to be a sentient cloud of gas contained within a humanoid-shaped force field. Another looked like a collection of metallic spheres that somehow managed to move and communicate as a single entity. The third was vaguely reptilian, but with 6 arms and what appeared to be natural armor plating. The 4th member of the delegation was perhaps the most unsettling. It looked almost human, except for the fact that its skin was a pale purple color and its eyes were completely black. When it spoke, Sarah realized that it wasn't using the universal translator at all, but was somehow speaking perfect English. "Captain Chen," it said in a voice that was pleasant but somehow wrong, "I am Coordinator HFY.
I have been assigned to conduct your species preliminary assessment.
I trust you understand the importance of this process."
Sarah leaned back in her chair, studying the alien across from her.
"I understand that you believe it's important, Coordinator. But, I have to say, I'm a little confused by your approach."
The reptilian delegate hissed something that the translator rendered as sharp disapproval.
"Confusion is expected from newly contacted species. The assessment protocol exists to ensure proper integration into galactic civilization." "Oh, I'm not confused about that," Sarah replied, her tone remaining conversational. "I'm confused about why you think you have the authority to assess us at all." The silence in the room was profound. Dr. Yuki, seated next to Sarah, maintained her composure, but the captain could see the slight widening of her eyes that indicated surprise. Even the gas being seemed to dim slightly. Coordinator HFY leaned forward, his black eyes focusing intently on Sarah. "The Galactic Assembly has governed interstellar relations for over 1,000 years. Every spacefaring species has undergone assessment and classification. It is not a matter of authority, Captain. It is a matter of established law."
Sarah smiled, and several of her officers recognized the expression from their earlier encounter with the Orbital Defense Fleet.
"Coordinator, I think you're operating under a fundamental misunderstanding. You see, human law doesn't recognize any authority that we haven't explicitly agreed to acknowledge." The metallic sphere being suddenly emitted a series of rapid clicks and whistles that the translators struggled to interpret. The final rendering was something like, "Legal frameworks cannot be selectively applied based on species preferences." "Actually, they can," Sarah replied, addressing the sphere directly. "At least, they can when the species in question is capable of defending their position."
Which brings us to an interesting point.
She stood and walked to the conference room's main display, activating a holographic representation of the Defiance's technical specifications. "Your assessment protocols assume that newly contacted species are naturally inferior to assembly members.
But what happens when that assumption is wrong?"
Dr. Yuki took her cue and activated a second display showing comparative data.
"These are the technical specifications of your orbital defense fleet versus our ship. Power generation, weapons capability, defensive systems, maneuverability. Would any of you like to guess which numbers belong to which ships?"
The delegates studied the data for several minutes. Sarah could see confusion beginning to creep into their body language as they realized that the superior specifications all belonged to a single ship rather than the entire defense fleet. Coordinator HFY spoke first, his voice tight with controlled surprise. "This data suggests that your vessel is significantly more advanced than our standard defense platforms." "It doesn't suggest anything, Coordinator."
"It proves it."
Sarah returned to her seat, her expression remaining friendly despite the bombshell she had just dropped. "Now, given that information, I'd like you to explain why we should submit to assessment by representatives of less advanced civilizations." The reptilian delegate's armor plates began shifting color from green to orange, which Dr. Yuki's xenobiology briefing had indicated was a sign of extreme agitation.
"Advanced technology does not grant exemption from civilized behavior.
The assembly maintains order through established protocols."
"And what happens when those protocols are based on false assumptions?" Sarah asked. "Tell me, in your 1,000-year history, have you ever encountered a species that was more advanced than your own?"
The question hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah could see the delegates exchanging glances, or whatever passed for glances among beings with such diverse anatomies. Finally, the gas being spoke, its voice a whisper that the translator could barely catch. "The assembly represents the pinnacle of galactic civilization. Member species contribute their unique strengths to benefit all." Sarah laughed, a sound that seemed to genuinely shock the aliens. "That's a beautiful sentiment, but it doesn't answer my question. Have you ever encountered a species more advanced than yourselves? Yes or no?" More silence. Sarah let it stretch for nearly a minute before continuing.
"I'll take that as a no."
"Which means your entire governmental system is based on the assumption that you'll always be the most advanced civilization in any room. But here we are, and, suddenly, that assumption doesn't hold up very well. Dr. Yuki activated another display, this one showing Earth's technological development timeline. Coordinator Vexhi, your species achieved faster than light travel approximately 3,000 years ago. The assembly itself was founded shortly after that achievement. In the 1,000 years since, how much has your technology actually advanced? The purple-skinned humanoid studied the display with obvious discomfort. Technological development slows as civilizations mature. The assembly has perfected most essential technologies. Has it? Dr. Yuki highlighted several sections of the timeline. Humanity achieved faster than light travel only 50 years ago. In that time, we've developed fusion drives that are 40% more efficient than your best engines, deflector systems that can multitask beyond anything your ships carry, and weapons that could disable your entire orbital defense network without causing permanent damage. 50 years, Sarah repeated, letting the numbers sink in. We've been in space for less time than some of you have been alive, and we're already building better ships than civilizations that have had millennia to perfect their designs. The spherical delegate emitted a rapid series of increasingly agitated clicks. The translator was having difficulty keeping up, but phrases like impossible development rate and dangerous expansion potential came through clearly. Sarah nodded as if the alien had made her point for her. Now you're beginning to understand the real problem. You're not just dealing with another species to classify and file away. You're dealing with a species that innovates faster than your entire civilization combined. Coordinator Vexhi leaned back in his chair, his black eyes reflecting the holographic displays. What exactly are you proposing, Captain Chun? I'm not proposing anything, Coordinator. I'm informing you of the reality of this situation. Humanity didn't come here to be assessed, classified, and assigned a place in your hierarchy. We came here to establish diplomatic relations between equals. The Assembly does not recognize claims of equality without proper verification, the reptilian delegate stated, its armor now a deep red color. Then, verify, Sarah replied calmly. Send your best engineers to examine our ship. Have your scientists review our technological data. Conduct whatever tests you need to satisfy yourselves that we are what we claim to be. She stood again, moving to the viewport that looked out over the massive docking facility. But, understand this, we're not going to wait 3 weeks for you to make up your minds. And, we're certainly not going to accept classification as anything less than a sovereign species with full diplomatic rights. Dr. Yuki added quietly, Captain, there's something else they should know. The Defiance isn't our most advanced ship. The effect of this statement on the delegation was immediate and dramatic. The gas being actually flickered, the metallic spheres began orbiting each other in rapid, agitated patterns, and Coordinator Vexhi's skin shifted to a noticeably paler shade of purple. Dr. Yuki, Sarah said with apparent casualness, would you mind elaborating on that point? Certainly, Captain. The Defiance is a diplomatic vessel, designed for long-range exploration and first contact missions. She's built for endurance and reliability rather than raw performance. Our military vessels are considerably more capable. Sarah could practically hear the delegates' worldviews cracking. For 1,000 years, the Assembly had maintained power through the simple expedient of being the most advanced civilization anyone encountered. Their protocols, their hierarchy, their entire governmental structure was based on technological superiority. But humanity represented something they had never encountered before, a younger species that was advancing faster than they were. I believe, Sarah said, turning back to face the delegation, that we need to have a very different conversation than the one you originally planned. The question isn't where humanity fits in your existing order. The question is whether your existing order can adapt to include us as equals, or whether we need to establish a new framework for interstellar relations. Coordinator Vexhi was quiet for a long moment before responding. This matter will require consultation with the full Assembly Council. Of course it will, Sarah agreed. And, we'll be happy to present our case to them. But, Coordinator, make sure they understand that this isn't a request for admission to your club. This is a notification that there's a new power in the galaxy, and we're interested in talking about how we can work together. The delegation departed 20 minutes later, leaving behind an atmosphere of tension and uncertainty that Sarah found oddly satisfying. They had come aboard expecting to process another primitive species seeking the protection and guidance of their betters. Instead, they had encountered a civilization that was politely but firmly declining to be processed at all.
Captain, Commander Park said once the aliens had left, do you think they'll actually convene the full council?
Sarah looked out at the thousands of ships surrounding them, representing hundreds of different species all organized according to the Assembly's careful hierarchy.
Lisa, I think they don't have much choice. We've just presented them with a problem they've never faced before. And if they decide they can't accept us as equals?
Sarah smiled, but there was steel in her expression. Then, they're going to discover that humanity didn't survive on Earth by backing down from superior numbers. The Grand Council chamber of the Galactic Assembly was a monument to bureaucratic grandeur that had intimidated countless species over the past millennium. Built into the core of Valdris Prime's largest moon, the chamber stretched nearly 2 kilometers in diameter, with tiered seating rising in concentric circles toward a domed ceiling that displayed real-time images of the galaxy's spiral arms. Sarah Chen stood at the center of it all, in a circular platform traditionally reserved for species seeking admission to the Assembly. Around her, representatives of 700 different civilizations observed with various combinations of curiosity, concern, and barely concealed hostility. The sheer diversity was breathtaking. Beings of pure energy shared space with crystalline entities, while species that communicated through color changes sat next to others who existed as collective consciousnesses. At the highest tier, the Assembly's ruling council occupied thrones that had been crafted from materials native to each of their homeworlds. The High Chancellor, a being that looked like a cross between a tree and a jellyfish, presided over the proceedings with what Sarah assumed was ceremonial dignity. Representative Chen of the species known as humanity, the High Chancellor began, its voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics, you stand before this body claiming equality with civilizations that have maintained galactic peace for 1,000 years.
This is a claim that requires extraordinary proof.
Sarah looked around the chamber, taking in the scope of the assembly she was challenging. Dr. Yuki had briefed her on the various species present, but seeing them in person was still overwhelming. Yet she felt no intimidation, only a growing sense of confidence in her position. High Chancellor, she replied, her voice carrying easily through the vast space, with respect, I'm not claiming anything.
I'm stating facts.
Humanity is technologically advanced, politically independent, and militarily capable.
These aren't boasts or negotiations.
They're simply the reality of our situation. A ripple of various sounds, colors, and emanations swept through the chamber. Sarah's universal translator was struggling to keep up with the sheer variety of communications methods, but the general tone seemed to be skepticism mixed with indignation.
Coordinator Vexhai stood from his position in the mid-tier seating.
High Chancellor, if I may address the chamber regarding this species' technological claims. The High Chancellor gestured permission with what might have been a branch or tentacle. 3 days ago, I led a delegation to assess the human vessel currently docked at our station.
What we found challenges several fundamental assumptions about technological development.
Vexhai activated a holographic display that showed comparative data between human and assembly technology. In power generation alone, their single ship exceeds the combined output of our entire orbital defense grid. The chamber erupted into chaos. Representatives began communicating frantically with each other in dozens of different methods. Some species changed color rapidly, others emitted complex harmonic patterns, and a few began moving in what appeared to be elaborate dances. The High Chancellor restored order by generating a low, resonant tone that somehow commanded attention from every being present.
Coordinator Vexhai, are you suggesting that a single human vessel is more powerful than our primary defense installations?
I'm not suggesting it, High Chancellor.
I'm confirming it.
Furthermore, their representative has indicated that this vessel is not representative of their military capabilities. Sarah stepped forward slightly, drawing attention back to herself. If I may expand on that point, High Chancellor.
The Defiance is a diplomatic vessel.
Her primary mission is exploration and peaceful contact.
Our actual military ships are designed for very different purposes.
And what purposes might those be? Asked a delegate that appeared to be made entirely of liquid metal.
Sarah smiled, recognizing the opening she had been hoping for. Defense of human interests, primarily.
You see, humanity developed in what you might call a challenging environment. Our homeworld has experienced multiple mass extinction events, ice ages, asteroid impacts, and various other catastrophes. The species that survived those events learned to be very, very good at protecting themselves. Dr. Yuki, who had been granted permission to accompany Sarah as a technical advisor, activated her tablet and projected additional data into the chamber's display system.
If I may demonstrate, honored delegates. This is Earth's biological diversity index compared to other inhabited worlds in the galaxy.
The numbers that appeared caused another wave of agitation throughout the chamber.
Earth's biodiversity exceeded the galactic average by nearly 3 orders of magnitude.
As you can see, Dr. Yuki continued, Earth produces an extraordinary variety of life forms.
The competition for resources is intense, which drives rapid evolution and adaptation. Humanity didn't just survive in this environment.
We thrived to the point where we became the dominant species on our planet. A delegate that looked like a walking flower garden spoke up, its voice rendered by the translator as a melodious whisper. Genetic aggressiveness does not automatically translate to technological or cultural advancement.
Doesn't it?
Sarah asked, turning to address the speaker directly.
Tell me, honored delegate, how many existential threats has your species faced? How many times have you been forced to innovate or die?
The flower being's petals shifted colors in what Dr. Yuki had learned indicated confusion. The assembly has protected member species from existential threats for centuries.
Exactly, Sarah replied.
And, while the assembly has been protecting its members, humanity has been facing down threats that would have wiped out less adaptable species. We've learned to solve problems quickly, efficiently, and decisively because failure meant extinction.
She gestured to the holographic display still showing Earth's data. Every single one of those catastrophic events that our planet experienced forced us to innovate. Ice Age?
We learned to control fire and build shelters.
Asteroid impact?
We developed global communication and early warning systems.
Resource depletion?
We learned to use energy more efficiently and find alternative sources.
The High Chancellor leaned forward on its throne, multiple appendages swaying in what might have been thoughtfulness.
You suggest that adversity breeds advancement. Yet many species have faced hardships without achieving significant technological development.
True, Sarah acknowledged.
But most species face one or two major challenges during their evolution.
Earth threw everything it could at us, repeatedly, over millions of years. We didn't just adapt once. We learned to adapt as a fundamental survival skill.
Dr. Yuki added supporting data to the display. The human technological advancement curve shows exponential growth over the past 500 years, accelerating dramatically in the past century. Most galactic civilizations show steady but linear development over much longer time periods. Which brings us to the real issue, Sarah continued, her voice carrying a note of challenge. The assembly's entire power structure is based on technological superiority and the assumption that established civilizations will always be more advanced than newly encountered species.
But what happens when that assumption is wrong?
A delegate that appeared to be a crystalline formation spoke with a voice like wind chimes.
The assembly maintains order through consensus and established protocols. Technology alone does not determine governmental authority. Sarah nodded respectfully. I agree completely. Which is why humanity isn't asking to take over your government or replace your authority.
We're asking to be recognized as an independent, sovereign species with the right to exist outside your hierarchical structure. The chamber fell silent. For several long moments, the only sound was the subtle hum of the station's environmental systems and the quiet communication of species that couldn't use vocal methods.
Finally, a delegate from the upper tiers spoke.
Sarah's briefing materials identified it as a representative of one of the Assembly's founding species, a highly advanced civilization that had been instrumental in establishing the original governmental structure.
Representative Chen, your request is unprecedented.
In 1,000 years of operation, the Assembly has never recognized a completely independent species within its sphere of influence.
Such recognition would undermine the fundamental principles upon which galactic civilization is based.
Sarah had been expecting this argument. Honored delegate, I would argue that your fundamental principles are already undermined. They're based on the assumption of assembly technological superiority, which no longer exists. You can either adapt your principles to acknowledge this new reality, or you can try to maintain them through force.
Are you threatening the assembly?
The question came from multiple delegates simultaneously, in a variety of communication methods.
Not at all, Sarah replied calmly.
I'm pointing out that the galaxy has changed, whether you acknowledge it or not.
Humanity exists. We're technologically advanced. We're politically independent. These facts don't cease to be true just because they're inconvenient for your governmental structure.
She gestured toward the chamber's dome, which showed the galaxy turning slowly overhead.
You have two basic options.
You can recognize humanity as an independent species and work with us to establish new frameworks for interstellar relations. Or you can attempt to force us to conform to your existing system.
And, if we choose the latter, asked the High Chancellor. Sarah's expression became very serious.
Then, you'll discover that humanity learned more than just technology from our violent history.
We also learned how to fight.
The silence that followed was profound and uncomfortable. Sarah could see delegates exchanging rapid communications, probably trying to assess whether her statement was a threat or simply a statement of fact.
Dr. Yuki stepped forward slightly. If I may address the technological implications, honored delegates. Humanity's rapid development curve shows no signs of slowing.
In fact, contact with galactic civilization is likely to accelerate our advancement significantly. In 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, the technological gap will only grow wider.
A delegate that appeared to be a sentient machine spoke with mechanical precision. Projected advancement rates suggest significant strategic implications for regional stability.
Exactly, Sarah agreed. Which is why it makes sense to establish cooperative relationships now, while we're still interested in working within existing frameworks. If you force us into an adversarial position, future negotiations will be much more difficult.
The High Chancellor generated its attention-commanding tone again. The Council will recess to consider these matters.
Representative Chen, you will remain available for further questioning. As the delegates began filing out of the chamber, Sarah felt a mixture of satisfaction and concern. She had made her position clear, but she also understood that she had just challenged the fundamental assumptions of a 1,000-year-old civilization. Change, even necessary change, rarely came easily to entrenched institutions. Dr. Yuki approached her as the chamber emptied.
Captain, do you think they'll actually adapt their system to accommodate us?
Sarah watched the last few delegates exit through various portals designed for different atmospheric requirements.
Honestly, Elena, I don't know.
But I do know that we've given them all the information they need to make an informed decision.
And if they make the wrong decision?
Sarah's expression hardened slightly. Then, they'll learn that humanity didn't come this far by accepting other people's choices about our fate. The Assembly Council's deliberations lasted 18 hours, during which time Sarah Chen found herself with unprecedented access to the station's facilities. Word of her presentation to the Grand Council had spread throughout the massive orbital complex, and everywhere she went, she encountered beings who wanted to get a closer look at the human who had challenged the fundamental order of galactic civilization. Sarah was examining an alien art installation in one of the station's cultural districts when Commander Park found her, moving quickly through the crowd with obvious urgency. "Captain, we have a problem," Lisa said quietly, joining Sarah at what appeared to be a sculpture made of crystallized sound waves. "Marcus has been monitoring assembly communication channels. There's been a significant development." Sarah studied her first officer's expression, noting the tension around her eyes.
"What kind of development? The Council isn't just debating your proposal.
They're debating whether humanity represents a threat that needs to be contained before it becomes unmanageable." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the station's environmental systems. She had hoped that the Assembly would recognize the logic of cooperation over confrontation, but she had always known that fear might override rational analysis.
"How serious is the threat assessment?"
"Serious enough that they've quietly mobilized additional fleet assets. Marcus detected at least 40 ships moving toward this system over the past 6 hours. They're being careful to mask the movements as routine patrol shifts, but the pattern is clear. Sarah nodded slowly, her mind already working through the implications. If the assembly decided that humanity posed an unacceptable risk to their established order, they had the numbers to attempt containment. The question was whether they understood the likely consequences of that decision.
Lisa, signal the defiance. I want all senior staff in the conference room in 30 minutes.
And send a priority message to Earth. Tell them that first contact has become significantly more complicated. They made their way back through the station's corridors, noting that the aliens they encountered now seemed more wary than curious. Word was spreading that something significant was happening, even if most beings didn't understand exactly what. 25 minutes later, Sarah stood before her senior staff in the Defiance's main conference room. The holographic display showed tactical data that Marcus had compiled during his surveillance of assembly communications. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sarah began, "it appears that our diplomatic mission has encountered an unexpected complication.
Dr. Yuki, what's your assessment of the current situation?"
Elena Yuki consulted her tablet, displaying analysis data on the main screen. "Captain, based on communication intercepts and fleet movement patterns, approximately 60% of the Assembly Council views humanity as a potential threat requiring immediate containment.
30% are advocating for further assessment before making any decisions. Only 10% are supporting recognition of human sovereignty."
In other words, Commander Park added grimly, they're seriously considering military action to force us into compliance. Marcus Webb spoke up from his position at the communications console.
"Captain, I've been analyzing their fleet deployments.
If their goal is containment rather than destruction, they're positioning forces to cut off our escape routes while maintaining overwhelming numerical superiority for any direct confrontation." Sarah studied the tactical display, noting the subtle but unmistakable pattern of assembly ships moving into strategic positions. Whoever was planning this operation understood both human capabilities and human psychology. They weren't trying to destroy the Defiance, they were trying to create a situation where resistance would appear futile.
"Dr. Yuki, remind me about assembly military doctrine. How do they typically handle species that resist integration?"
Historical records show a consistent pattern, Captain. They begin with economic and diplomatic pressure, escalate to limited military demonstrations, and ultimately resort to what they call protective occupation if resistance continues.
Protective occupation?
They take control of the resistant species' homeworld and infrastructure, claiming it's necessary to prevent the species from harming themselves or others. The occupation continues until the species accepts assembly authority and agrees to proper integration. Sarah felt anger rising in her chest, cold and controlled. The assembly wasn't just threatening humanity's independence, they were threatening Earth itself. The idea of alien ships in orbit around her homeworld, alien bureaucrats deciding the fate of billions of humans, was intolerable.
"Marcus, how quickly could Earth receive a message from our current position?"
"Approximately 4 days at maximum transmission speed, Captain."
"And how long would it take for Earth to mobilize a response?"
Marcus consulted his calculations.
"Unknown, Captain. We don't have detailed information about current fleet dispositions or strategic planning."
Sarah nodded, but privately she suspected that Earth's response capabilities might surprise the assembly.
Humanity's tendency toward rapid innovation hadn't stopped with the Defiance's launch.
If anything, the knowledge that they weren't alone in the galaxy had accelerated military development significantly.
"Commander Park, what are our tactical options?"
Lisa had been expecting the question and had prepared her analysis. "If they move against us directly, we can probably fight our way out of the immediate area. The Defiance is faster and more maneuverable than anything they have, and our defensive systems should be able to handle their weapons for at least a short engagement."
"But we can't fight the entire assembly fleet," Dr. Yuki pointed out.
"Eventually, superior numbers would overcome our technological advantages."
"Maybe," Sarah said thoughtfully.
"But I think there's something they haven't considered in their threat assessment." She walked to the viewport, looking out at the massive station complex and the hundreds of ships moving through carefully controlled traffic patterns. They're evaluating humanity based on the same assumptions they use for every other species they encounter.
"But we're not like every other species." "Captain?" Commander Park prompted. "Think about it,
Lisa. Every species the Assembly has encountered developed in a relatively stable environment under the protection of their civilization. When the Assembly shows up with overwhelming force, those species calculate the odds and surrender because resistance seems pointless. Sarah turned back to face her staff. But humanity developed in a much more hostile environment. We learned that sometimes you have to fight impossible odds because the alternative is extinction. The Assembly is about to discover that threatening Earth was a serious mistake. Marcus looked up from his console. Captain, I'm receiving a priority transmission from the Grand Council. They're requesting your immediate return for the announcement of their decision. Sarah smiled, but there was no humor in the expression. Well, it looks like we're about to find out which way they've decided to play this. Lisa, I want the ship at full readiness. Marcus, continue monitoring their fleet movements. And, Dr. Yuki, I want you to prepare a complete technical package on human capabilities for immediate transmission to Earth. Captain, are you expecting hostilities? Dr. Yuki asked. I'm expecting the Assembly to make the same mistake that every other superior force in human history has made. They're going to assume that overwhelming numbers automatically lead to victory. 30 minutes later, Sarah found herself once again standing in the center of the Grand Council chamber, but the atmosphere had changed dramatically. The casual curiosity of her first appearance had been replaced by an almost palpable tension. Representatives who had seemed merely skeptical before now displayed clear signs of hostility or fear. The High Chancellor's voice carried a note of finality that hadn't been present during their earlier session. Representative Chen, the Assembly Council has reached its decision regarding humanity's status within galactic civilization. Sarah stood straight, her hands clasped behind her back, prepared for whatever was coming. After extensive deliberation, this council has determined that humanity's rapid technological development and aggressive cultural patterns pose an unacceptable risk to galactic stability. Therefore, the Assembly will implement immediate protective measures to ensure that human expansion does not threaten established civilizations. The High Chancellor paused, allowing the implications to sink in. Your vessel will be detained for detailed technical analysis. Your species will be placed under Assembly protection pending the establishment of proper governmental oversight. Earth itself will be quarantined until suitable arrangements can be made for human integration into galactic society. Sarah let the silence stretch for nearly a minute before responding. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm and clear, carrying easily through the vast chamber. High Chancellor, I want to make sure I understand your decision correctly. You're declaring war on humanity because you're afraid that we might become more advanced than you already are. This is not a declaration of war, the High Chancellor replied stiffly. This is a protective action designed to ensure galactic stability. Sarah laughed, a sound that seemed to echo strangely in the chamber's acoustics. You're mobilizing fleets to attack our homeworld, planning to occupy our territory, and preparing to dismantle our government. In human terms, that's not protection. That's conquest. A delegate from the upper tiers stood to address the chamber. The Assembly has successfully maintained peace for 1,000 years through careful management of potentially destabilizing species. Humanity will benefit from proper guidance and protection. Protection from what? Sarah asked, her voice rising slightly. From ourselves? From our own technological advancement? Or from your fear that we might not need your guidance? She turned to address the entire chamber, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast space. Let me tell you what's going to happen next, honored delegates. You're going to send your fleets to Earth, confident that your superior numbers and 1,000-year-old technology will be sufficient to cow another primitive species into submission. The chamber had fallen completely silent, every being present focused on her words. But Earth isn't another primitive species. Earth is a world that produced a civilization capable of surviving everything the universe could throw at it. And, when your fleets arrive, they're going to discover that humanity learned something during our violent evolution that you apparently never did. She paused, meeting the gazes of as many delegates as possible. We learned that sometimes the smaller force wins not because they're stronger, but because they're willing to fight harder and think faster than anyone expects. The High Chancellor's appendages swayed in what might have been agitation.
You cannot seriously believe that one planet can resist the combined forces of the assembly. Sarah's smile returned, cold and confident.
High Chancellor, you're about to find out exactly what one planet can accomplish when its survival is threatened. And, when this is over, you'll understand why every other species in human history that tried to conquer us is now extinct. The silence that followed was broken only by the subtle sounds of hundreds of species engaging in rapid communication with their homeworlds. Sarah could see the realization spreading through the chamber as delegates began to understand that they had just made an enemy of a species that considered warfare a natural extension of diplomacy.
The decision has been made, the High Chancellor stated, but its voice lacked the certainty it had possessed moments before. Sarah nodded once, formally. Yes, it has.
And, now both of our species will have to live with the consequences. As she turned to leave the chamber, Sarah felt a grim satisfaction. The assembly had chosen the path of confrontation, confident in their superior numbers and established authority. They were about to learn that humanity's greatest strength had never been its technology. It had always been its absolute refusal to accept defeat. The Defiant streaked through space at maximum velocity, her fusion drive pushing the limits of what even human engineering had thought possible. Behind them, the massive orbital complex around Valdris Prime was receding rapidly, but Saracen knew that escape from the immediate area was only the first step in what had now become humanity's greatest challenge. Captain, Marcus called from his communications station, I'm getting confirmation on our transmission to Earth. The package arrived intact and has been forwarded to the Terran Defense Council. Sarah nodded, her eyes focused on the tactical display showing assembly fleet movements throughout the local star systems. The enemy had been quick to respond to her departure from the station, but their ships were designed for intimidation rather than pursuit. The Defiance was simply too fast and too maneuverable for them to intercept. Dr. Yuki, how long until the assembly fleet reaches Earth? Elena consulted her calculations, cross-referencing assembly ship specifications with the distance to the Sol system. Based on their fastest ships and most direct route, approximately 3 weeks, Captain. Their main battle fleet will take longer, maybe 5 weeks. And how long for our message to reach Earth and for a response to return? 8 days total, assuming they respond immediately. Sarah felt a cold satisfaction at those numbers. Humanity would have advance warning of the assembly's intentions, time to prepare whatever response Earth's defenders thought appropriate. And, given what she knew about human nature, she suspected that response would be both swift and decisive. Commander Park, what's our fuel situation? Lisa checked her engineering displays. We're running at 93% efficiency, Captain. Enough fuel to reach Earth with reserves for combat operations. Good. Because I suspect we're going to need those reserves. The bridge fell quiet except for the hum of ship systems as they continued their high-speed transit toward home. Sarah used the time to review everything she knew about assembly capabilities and tactics, looking for weaknesses that Earth's military planners could exploit. 6 days later, as they approached the edge of Earth's solar system, Marcus detected the first signs that humanity had been busy during their absence. Captain, I'm picking up unusual gravitational signatures near Jupiter. Multiple large objects in orbital patterns that weren't there when we left. Sarah moved to the science station, studying the sensor data with growing amazement. Elena, what am I looking at? Dr. Yuki manipulated the displays, enhancing the sensor returns to reveal massive structures orbiting Jupiter's largest moons. Those appear to be shipyards, Captain. Big ones. And I'm detecting active construction signatures for, holy God, how many ships are they building? Count them. I'm showing construction signatures for at least 200 vessels, ranging from frigate class to something that registers as nearly 8 kilometers long. Sarah whistled low. In the 3 months since the Defiance had left Earth, humanity had apparently transformed its entire industrial capacity for war production. Someone had taken her mission very seriously indeed. Marcus, signal Earth. Tell them the Defiance is returning with critical intelligence about assembly capabilities. Aye, Captain. Earth Control is responding. They're directing us to Luna Station for immediate debriefing. 2 hours later, Sarah found herself in a conference room deep within Luna Station's military command complex, facing a gathering of Earth's most senior military and political leaders.
Admiral Chen Yamazaki, chairman of the Terran Defense Council, presided over a meeting that included representatives from every major Earth nation and colony.
Captain Chen, Admiral Yamazaki began, your preliminary report has caused quite a stir.
Tell us about this assembly threat.
Sarah activated her portable display, showing the tactical information she had gathered during her stay at Veldris Prime.
Admiral, the assembly is mobilizing approximately 3,000 ships for what they call a protective action against Earth.
Their stated goal is to occupy our planet and force us to accept their governmental authority. The room erupted in angry voices from multiple languages as the political representatives absorbed the implications.
Admiral Yamazaki restored order by simply standing and waiting for silence. Captain, what are we dealing with in terms of enemy capabilities?
Individually, their ships are less advanced than ours, but they have significant numerical superiority. Their weapons are energy-based, primarily plasma and particle beam systems. Their shields are standard deflector technology, drawing power from fusion cores that are less efficient than our own. Dr. Yuki, who had accompanied Sarah to the briefing, added her analysis. Admiral, the most important factor is that assembly military doctrine hasn't evolved in centuries.
They rely on overwhelming force and intimidation rather than tactical innovation. They've never faced an opponent who could match their technology. General Sarah Martinez, representing Earth's ground forces, leaned forward in her chair. What about their invasion capabilities? Can they actually occupy Earth if they defeat our fleet? Sarah exchanged glances with Dr. Yuki before answering.
General, their occupation protocols are based on experiences with species that surrender once their space-based defenses are eliminated. I don't think they understand what planetary resistance means to humans.
Admiral Yamazaki nodded thoughtfully. Captain, based on your assessment, what are our chances in a direct confrontation?
In a straight fleet engagement, Admiral, they'll probably win through sheer numbers. But I don't think we should plan for a straight fleet engagement.
Explain. Sarah activated a new display showing Earth's solar system with projected assembly approach routes.
They're expecting to face a primitive defense force that will either surrender immediately or fight a conventional battle they're guaranteed to lose. Instead, I recommend that we give them something they've never encountered before, asymmetric warfare on an interstellar scale.
The room fell silent as military minds began to process the implications of Sarah's suggestion. Colonel James Morrison, Earth's chief strategic planner, spoke first. Captain, are you suggesting guerrilla tactics in space?
I'm suggesting that we use our advantages instead of playing to theirs. We're faster, more maneuverable, and more innovative.
Our industrial capacity is more efficient, and our crews are more adaptable.
Instead of meeting their massive fleet head-on, we hit them where they don't expect it and keep hitting them until they realize that occupying Earth is going to cost more than they're willing to pay.
Admiral Yamazaki studied the tactical displays with the expression of someone seeing new possibilities. What did you have in mind?
Sarah smiled, and several people in the room recognized the expression from her reports about her encounters with assembly forces. Admiral, the assembly controls 700 member species across 43 star systems. Their entire empire is built on the assumption that their core worlds are safe from attack because no one has ever been able to challenge their technological superiority.
But we can challenge it, Dr. Yuki added. Not just challenge it, but exceed it. Exactly. So instead of defending Earth and waiting for them to come to us, why don't we take the fight to them?
Hit their supply lines, disrupt their communications, demonstrate to their member species that the assembly isn't as invincible as they claim. General Martinez was nodding slowly. Guerrilla warfare works because it makes occupation too expensive to maintain. If we can make their empire too expensive to maintain, they'll have to choose between conquering Earth and maintaining control over the species they've already conquered, Sarah finished. And I suspect that most of their member species aren't as enthusiastic about assembly rule as the assembly likes to believe.
Admiral Yamazaki stood and walked to the main display, studying the star charts showing assembly territory. Captain, how long do you think it would take to organize this kind of campaign?
That depends on how many ships we can build and how quickly we can train crews for them.
But, Admiral, I think we have one significant advantage that the assembly doesn't know about.
Which is?
Sarah's smile widened.
Every human who's ever read a history book knows exactly how to fight a larger, more powerful opponent.
It's what we've been doing for our entire existence as a species.
Colonel Morrison leaned forward. Captain, you're talking about taking on an empire that's existed for 1,000 years. Colonel, that empire has existed for 1,000 years because no one has ever been willing to fight it properly. They're used to intimidating species into submission, not actually fighting wars against opponents who refuse to surrender.
Admiral Yamazaki returned to his seat, his expression thoughtful.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think Captain Chen has outlined a strategy that plays to our strengths while exploiting their weaknesses.
The question is, are we prepared to commit Earth to what could be a very long and very dangerous conflict?
The political representatives exchanged glances, and Sarah could see the weight of decision settling over them.
They were being asked to approve a strategy that would put humanity at war with the largest empire in the galaxy. President Elena Rodriguez, speaking for the Terran Republic, broke the silence. Admiral, what are our alternatives? Surrender and accept assembly occupation, or fight a defensive war we'll probably lose. Then, it seems we don't really have a choice, do we? Admiral Yamazaki nodded slowly.
Captain Chen, you'll retain command of the Defiance and serve as our liaison with any assembly forces that approach Earth. Your knowledge of their capabilities will be invaluable.
Understood, Admiral.
General Martinez, begin preparations for planetary defense, but assume that our primary strategy will be offensive operations against assembly territory.
Yes, sir. Colonel Morrison, I want detailed operational plans for strikes against assembly infrastructure within 2 weeks. You'll have them, Admiral. Admiral Yamazaki stood again, and the rest of the room followed his lead.
Ladies and gentlemen, 3 months ago we sent Captain Chen to make peaceful contact with Galactic civilization. Today, we're preparing for war with that same civilization. He paused, looking around the room at the faces of humanity's leadership.
But, I want everyone in this room to understand something. We didn't choose this fight.
The Assembly made the decision to threaten Earth because they were afraid of what we might become.
Now they're going to discover what we've always been, a species that doesn't know how to quit. As the meeting broke up and the various representatives dispersed to begin their preparations, Sarah remained behind with Admiral Yamazaki. Captain, the Admiral said quietly, do you really think we can win this?
Sarah looked out through the conference room's viewport at Earth, hanging blue and beautiful against the starfield.
Admiral, I think we're about to remind the galaxy why humanity has never lost a war for survival. And, if we're wrong? Sarah's expression hardened.
Then, the Assembly will discover that destroying humanity requires more than just defeating our fleets.
It requires wiping out every human in the galaxy, and we're very, very hard to kill. Admiral Yamazaki nodded, understanding the determination he heard in her voice.
Humanity was going to war, not just to defend Earth, but to establish once and for all that they would not be conquered, controlled, or contained by anyone. The Assembly had made their choice when they decided to threaten humanity's independence. Now they would discover that some species fight hardest when their backs are against the wall, and that humanity's back had been against the wall for its entire evolutionary history. The war for humanity's place in galactic civilization was about to begin, and it would be fought on humanity's terms, with innovation, determination, and the absolute refusal to accept defeat.